And so, just as a child is disposed to accept rules and dogma, to accept the external authority of parents, to accept the rules that are imposed upon it, the understanding of reality as the Church teaches, and what the Bible talks about as being from God, in contrast to this, the psychologists offer as more authentic, the idea that as the modern person enters from childhood, into the early stages of adulthood, something changes in them, and they awaken into a new perception as an individual. And in this new enlightened awakening, they no longer rely upon the old, now outmoded external authority, and instead, they replace the old ways by the new ways. By relying upon oneself, one has developed in this framework of understanding, one has rejected the darkness of an earlier time, has rejected faith, has rejected harmful ways of thinking, in favor of embracing science, critical thinking, and the ideals of human progress. Now, notice that this is a change in understanding. This is a change in framework. But this dialectic step, from the immature religious thought, to more mature secular thought, is a development in narrative, it is not actually scientific.
An interesting turn occurred when one turns from religion, as a positive virtue, to instead seeing religion, as an atavistic quality. That is, as a primitive vestigial remnant, from an earlier time. This led to a predictable inversion in frame, from a pre-enlightened religious psyche, to a non-religious dynamic. That is to say, before the Enlightenment, it was a social faux pas to be an unbeliever. However, after embracing the new psychology, it was now a social faux pas to remain a believer, a stigma for believers to be embarrassed about, and to remove from the public, social sphere, and to leave behind in their own private sphere, should believers wish to remain in their backward state.
An example for this is present in H. L. Mencken's foreword to Nietzsche's The Antichrist. Mencken makes the point that as a result of the inversion, and as a direct result of new Enlightenment thinking, including the impact of Darwin's Origin of Species, the cultured elite in Europe and America were largely ready for the change, ready to grow into the more mature secular understanding, and move beyond the old outmoded ways of religious thought. Between the hammer of Darwin and the anvil of German idealism, Mencken asserted that Christianity had collapsed among educated men by 1885.
Now, of course, there is some truth to this as a description of what occurred, but there is also some degree of overstatement. Mencken is not putting forward scientific knowledge, or proving or demonstrating a point, but is instead telling a story, driving a literary narrative, even engaging in some form of product marketing. He is writing the novel of the modern person, and how that person came to a superior understanding of reality by moving past their harmful vestigial religious past, and embracing reason and critical thinking.
And so, one can automatically see the product marketing in this step, the selling of the secular improvements to the human condition. However, many figures, even non-Christians like Karl Popper, for example, found such a development harmful. While remaining critical of religion, Popper criticized the Hegelian dialectic, and the inversion of values it brought. In his view, the dialectic step was a step into the irrational, even accusing it of causing the destructive fascism in the first half of the 20th century in the European West. We agree with Popper that science has no room for the product marketing that dialectical steps introduce.
In addition to the above harmful uses of the dialectic, there is a whole genre of harmful uses of dialectic methods that developed out of the embracing of extreme skepticism, and the ideas of contempt for other ideologies, and pride in self-autonomy, that was a direct part of Enlightenment philosophy. One example is the mockumentary, in which a hypercritical, unwholesome approach generates unfaithful forms of criticism. That is to say, the critic abandons a pretense to objectivity, and to any desire to faithfully represent the views of competing ideologies, instead replacing the most charitable readings of those ideologies with a mocking, profanely pejorative, inverted understanding in an aggressively partisan way. Here is an example. In this image there is a glib partisan mockingly summarizing a Christian position: God, when he sacrifices himself, to save mankind, from himself. Oh yeah, it's all coming together.
Another example is humorously represented in the game of Explain a Film Plot Badly. The idea is to make a game of using an inverted dialectical method, the more pejorative and unfaithful the better, to summarize a famous movie, in such a way as to still technically make truthful statements about it, while presenting it in the worst, most unfaithful way possible. In this first example, a critic summarizes the Lord of the Rings trilogy of films, as, group spends 9 hours, returning jewelry. The riposte is both witty and dismissive, at the same time, at the expense of minimizing a heroic epic.
In this example, a critic summarizes the Star Wars Episode 5 film by saying, "Talking frog convinces son to kill his dad." A true statement, in an inverted irrational dialectic sense, yet completely unfaithful in its reductionism.
Finally, a third example, The Nightmare on Elm Street, a horror film, is explained in sweet and wholesome terms by the critic. A wise-cracking boiler technician teaches high school students to believe in their dreams. There may be humor in making a game of frame inversion, but when secular people summarize religious doctrines in general, and Christian doctrines, in particular, it has the flavor of the profane. Rather than deal with Christianity on its terms, an inversion of frame occurs, a dialectic step happens, in which the wholesome intentions are replaced with unwholesome ones, and doctrines deliberately misunderstood, and presented in the most deprecating fashion possible.
And so, Bavinck notes the assessment of the new, modern, science of psychology. While not as bad as the Explain a Film Plot Badly mockumentary game, the reduction of Christian theology to the comparative science of religion, as polled results from questionnaires, is just as unfaithful in evaluating the content of religious doctrines, in the context of their own frames of reference. Here is a picture of Buddha, and Jesus, and other religious figures, walking, with Jesus saying, "I wonder, how many of our followers understand, that we're just symbols, of their own true self." And so we move from the faithful frame, or context of the Christian understanding of Christ, as God incarnated, to an idolatrous, non-Christian idea of Jesus, as anthropomorphic projection. Now, that may be the critic's belief, but it's not a faithful criticism of the way Christians represent Jesus, as the Christ.
So what are we to think? Where has the dialectic taken us? We have seen that dialectical methods are just literary tools, so in one sense, they are neutral, not any better, or worse, than other literary and rhetorical devices, capable of leading one to growth and development, in some applications, but also capable of great harm, in others. As Popper noted, dialectic steps are not appropriate for scientific conclusions, and are profitable only sometimes to advance thematic developments in human understanding.
However, while dialectical steps can be good or bad in theory, in practice, they have often been used to advance partisan, secular, worldview, and have been used to overstate the nature of scientific developments in order to further partisan interests. In general, for Christians, they have been bad news.
From a personal standpoint, I want to cite, as Gordon H. Clark pointed out, the most distinct danger is the tendency toward irrationalism. Dialectical methods offer narratives, or storylines, explaining how a person can grow in their knowledge, but often such steps are simply product marketing, for replacing one worldview with another, changing a mental frame of reference, without necessarily guaranteeing the integrity of the dialectical step. Here's an interesting article that explores the upside-down nature of iterated dialectical steps. After a sequence of steps, people can find their world so upside down and topsy-turvy that they are literally lost, without a frame of reference, in a maze of their own construction.
Truth becomes lies, lies becomes truth, life is death, death is life, and the only truth is the truth you make in the moment, unless, of course, you decide to appropriate the truth of the Christian religion, in which case you've failed, in the one job you had, as a secular existential being. People seem to want to be lied to, the article notes, and no wonder, whether in a political, or scientific, context, it becomes very difficult to return from the reverses of irrational dialectical steps. One loses the truth in the process. Many would like to nod in agreement with an observation attributed to Carl Jung: people cannot stand too much reality.
So, Christian friend, the dialectic method your secular friend wants you to adopt might be a blessing, an opportunity for growth, and a positive. Maybe. But caveat emptor, may the buyer beware.